My name is Raymond Clear. I'm the Associate Director of the Center for Teaching and Learning at Duke University. Alan, thanks so much, and all of your colleagues for putting on such a lovely event this evening. And it's my pleasure to introduce two panelists for this next session. Which is titled, where's our formal title here? Something about adolescents and teens. It's in there. It's in the mix. It's in your program as well. But let me first introduce Dr. Eva Telzer, who is a professor of psychology and neuroscience at UNC Chapel Hill. Her research examines how social and cultural processes shape adolescent brain development, with a focus on both pro-social and risk-taking behaviors, family and peer relationships, and the role of the digital environment in youth lives. And we're also joined this evening by Dr. Mitch Prinstein, who is the John Van Seters Distinguished Professor of Psychology and Neuroscience at UNC Chapel Hill, and his research examines interpersonal models of internalizing symptoms and health risk behaviors among adolescents, with a specific focus on the unique role of often online peer relationships in the development of psychopathology of depression and self-injury. So welcome to you both. I want to begin perhaps this evening by just asking you both serve as co-director of the Wilson Center. And perhaps you can just tell us a little bit about what brought you to this work, and also introduce the center to us. And we can begin with you.
Sure. So the Winston Center.
No, excuse me.
Thank you. Yeah, it's the Winston Center on Technology and Brain Development. And Mitch and I have been directing the center since about 2019, when it started as a small initiative to try to understand the role of technology in shaping adolescent development. I'd been studying the developing adolescent brain for about a decade at that point, and was really fascinated by how our social environments shape who we become, our peer and family contexts. And we couldn't any longer study that without understanding the role of social media, which was really transforming adolescents' daily lives. And Mitch Prinstein at the time was really diving deep into the digital and social media world, and this brought us together to start to put together Mitch's expertise in the peer environment and social media and digital environments, and my expertise in the developing brain during this really important developmental period.
Thank you, Mitch, please.
Oh, sure. Thank you. Thanks for having us here. It was probably one of the research participants who we were asking about their friendships and popularity and peer victimization and whether they were influenced by peers. And they said, wait, you mean like talking to friends in person? Like face to face? And when we first started realizing, wait a minute, this is starting to become a thing. And what's been really fascinating in collaborating with Eva is the way in which we see that the adolescent brain is developing in a particular way based on centuries and millennia of evolution. And within just 20 years, the online environment has kind of really changed fundamentally the context in which teens grow up. In research that we've been doing, we knew that adolescence is the time when you develop more sophisticated relationships, and that predicts so many things in adulthood. Successful relationships leads to your grades, your graduation, your job, your salary, your happiness in your marital relationship, and even your kids' happiness. So then to realize that this entire adolescent period was going to look really different than it was built to be, like that, became fascinating to study.
Yeah. Well, so in prior panels, we've heard a lot about both children and kids. We had a strong focus on families in the panel prior to this, but we are talking here about, again, teenagers and adolescents. And so because there's a focus on cognitive development and brain development, what might we not know, what might we assume to know about this period of development? Again, for our audience today, what are some just basic understandings to even begin our conversation?
Well, there's some fundamental changes that are happening in the adolescent brain that are so important for our understanding this developmental period. Unlike other periods in development, even later in childhood or early in adulthood, this period around puberty, the brain is undergoing more development, more changes. It's being shaped by its environment more so. It's more plastic than any other developmental period except for maybe the first year after life. And because of this plasticity, adolescents are so sensitive to their social world. But it's not just a blanket sensitivity. They're especially sensitive to social rewards, getting feedback from peers. They are very sensitive to all kinds of social, emotional contexts, but also this is a developmental period when the prefrontal cortex, our ability to regulate and engage in cognitive control, is still developing. And so it's a time when we're both seeking out peers, exceptionally sensitive to rewards, sensitive to punishments as well, during a period when it's a little bit harder to regulate those behaviors. And the online digital environment really reshapes that developmental sensitivity in the brain.
Yeah, we probably remember, or we see it in our kids, that when they're younger, they just want to play. And it's at this time when they start really thinking about more how to develop emotional intimacy, how to trust one another, how to, really develop a sense of loyalty and share secrets with one another. And one of the things that's become so interesting that kids have said to us is that although they're spending a remarkable amount of time now interacting with others, they feel that there's actually less emotional intimacy because they're interacting more with the number of people who are looking at their posts, or with the profile, which is not the full unvarnished picture of our lives. And they feel a sense of craving, like I want to get to know people more, I want to express my real self, but I'm really focused on how to get the most likes or followers. And that's such a dramatic difference from the way that adolescence usually transpired, for so long, that it's just been so interesting to watch how it's changing the way that adolescents are being adolescents.
Well, and so I guess maybe we can unpack that a little bit, because I don't want us to, again, assume that we know how, let's say, teenagers are using these technologies, right? We're talking a lot about social media, again, in prior panels and sessions this evening. Screen time, of course, came up a lot. What is your research telling you about how teens are actually using these various platforms, various social media, and in learning about those usage patterns, what is helping in terms of perhaps their development cognitively, and also what might be a hindrance?
Yeah, so there are a lot of ways that the online platforms and the devices are really helping kids that previously were struggling. And we see that in particular for minoritized youth, who might have been the only one in their school or even in their household with a specific sexual or gender identity status or racial, ethnic, religious status. And kids experience a tremendous amount of minority stress. Really what it's like to get microaggressions or experience that sense of isolation for being someone with a status that not others share. Now we have more diverse contacts online than we have offline. We have the opportunity to connect with others in a way that can really enhance those relationships. So there is great potential baked in to these products, which is great. When we ask kids, what do you do when you go online? What we find is that a sizable proportion are spending their time, though, on social comparison and seeking more status and followers and likes. And in that case, and I think we do it as adults sometimes too, we look at a photo, we look at a post, and we forget, wait a minute, that's not a random representative sample of this person's life. That's their best day. That's their best look. That might be a photoshopped look, in fact, But kids say, wait a minute, why wasn't I at that party? Or why don't I look like that when I wake up? And that, unfortunately, can create some challenge.
Do you want to speak to that? Like this distinction, I think, is really lovely that you brought up between teens who are making use of these platforms for social connection, although the ills potentially of social comparison. How do you navigate that? And how do you provide perhaps support to teenagers directly to navigate that distinction, but also perhaps to parents and caregivers to help those in their family to say, yeah, maybe these tools can be used for social connection and not necessarily for that social comparison?
Yeah, I think it's very challenging. Is this working? Is it now? Okay. it doesn't sound like it's.
Here,
Okay.
take it
All
away.
right,
Take it
all
away.
right. There, now I can hear a little echo, okay. I think in the current, it's very challenging to be a teenager, it's very challenging to be a parent. And with the way many of the social media platforms are designed, some of these benefits are really hard to find. And we really need more digital media literacy to help adolescents to be able to navigate these really complex digital environments. For example, an adolescent who might be engaging in a lot of social comparison, the way that the algorithms then work are going to feed that adolescent more and more of toxic eating related, negative body image related feeds, and so it's going to increase that exposure more and more. And so we really need to help give adolescents and parents the tools to talk about this and navigate it, because it's very challenging, even when one doesn't intentionally go on a platform to engage in social comparison. The ways that these likes come at them, or the comments, or the status symbols of the cool kids, or the algorithms that are going to feed them information that they didn't necessarily even seek out, makes it a very challenging scenario for youth and for their parents as well.
No, I think that is a challenge. You know, it would be important to also state that about the majority, close to 40, 50, sometimes 60% of kids report that they're exposed to a lot of things these days. It's different than when these things all started a while ago. Today, kids are being exposed not only to pro-anorexia content, but also content that teaches them how to cut themselves, how to hide that from their parents. They watch live suicide attempts. An interesting demonstration was done by a research group that took a brand new iPhone out of the box. They watched nothing online, they entered nothing into the device. They signed up for a social media account and identified themselves as a 15-year-old girl. In 7 minutes, that account was being fed content on how to engage in significant fasting, excessive exercising, restricting food. So the AI has changed things a lot, and you know, kids are being exposed to things that someone was telling me recently. If you've ever thought of your own feed and assumed that's similar to your kid's feed, then you've never looked at your kid's feed. Because what they get, the number of predators, the number of things that AI is pushing to them, it's just completely different than what we see.
I mean, those are some very shocking, examples. Very shocking examples of what we're trying. And again, I'm laughing for this, not the examples you were sharing, but we got almost 15 minutes without mentioning AI, and here we are. How is that influencing, though, not only the nature of what you're finding in your research, but ultimately the kinds of patterns, again, of youth and engagement that are impacting teens and impacting development? Clearly, some of the examples you just mentioned are quite disturbing. Is AI, in this case, accelerating or amplifying particularly harmful aspects of what you're finding?
We just collected data and started analyzing it a week ago, so this is very preliminary. But we collected data on 2,000 middle school students around the entire state of North Carolina. And we're doing this in collaboration with the North Carolina legislature, which is, they're very interested in setting some policies. AI can be good. Kids are using it for homework. That can be helpful. Once they're on there for homework, they're using it for other things too. That could be less helpful. But in our data, what was a bit interesting, as someone who studies human relationships off and online, is that we had about 10% of the middle school students saying, I prefer to talk to AI chatbots more than my friends. I feel like AI makes me less lonely. I feel like I can tell things to AI I wouldn't tell to others, and so on and so on. And I think that the question is somewhat, is AI good or bad? But also, what might AI be taking away that they would have done otherwise? Because if it would have been an interaction, even over text or FaceTime with a human peer, we don't want to lose those learning opportunities.
One other piece of data we have is from looking at, you can look at the keyboard strokes of what adolescents are entering into their AI chatbots, for example. And so we can code the themes of what kinds of conversations are they having with their chatbot. And two of the most common themes are related to sex and violence. And not what you would think of as a developmentally healthy, exploring your sexual identity kind of way, but in a much more concerning way. And so these platforms are providing a context where adolescents are maybe thinking it's a safer space, or they feel more comfortable engaging in asking their chatbot questions, but it's so unregulated and there's not a way to provide information and scaffolding to adolescents as they navigate some really complicated and perhaps conversations that need an adult to intervene and talk to them about.
Well, so I think many of us perhaps in here have been wondering about notions of companionship when it comes to AI. Certainly there are, I think, many stories and examples we've heard in the news about adults, but certainly it is concerning to think about teenagers in this. Do you have advice for parents or for families about how to, as you just said, like navigate these very developmentally necessary and important conversations, but to do so maybe by not turning to a chatbot? Do you advise parents to say this is the kind of conversation you should be having about their use of or lack thereof when it comes to AI in these conversations?
Yeah, I think the first thing that we often say to parents, and this is difficult for us all to admit to ourselves, but we have to recognize how much we may be doing some of the same things. Both in terms of how much time we spend on our device, how excited we get about things that might have happened on social media and we talk about at the dinner table, or how much we might convey a trust in AI. I don't know why, when I used to Google search something, I would never just take the answer I got from the first website. I would check another one at least and say, well, I don't know if that first website's a real thing, or let me see what site that is and make sure it's legit. But when Gemini summarizes all the websites for me, it's, okay, great, I have my answer. And I'm doing that. So I think it's so easy for us to fall into these traps. That's what they're built for in a way. And I think it's really important to continually convey, wait a minute, there's a lot of incorrect information on there. It's not any better than just the sum of all of the good and bad information. We still have to do our homework. We still have to check. So I think that that's really important. I think that the other thing that sounds trite, but I think is important for us to remember is that because most of us did not grow up with any of this, it becomes very easy to say, I don't know why you're on that thing, or I never grew up with that. And unfortunately, that accidentally conveys, if you ever have a question or a problem with that, I am the last person you should come and talk to. I've already judged you, I've already dismissed it as irrelevant. And what we might want to do instead is say, you teach me. Why are you doing that on social media? What are you learning it from that chatbot? Why do you like it? And hopefully, when there is a question on there, we will be the first person that they come to and say, remember I was telling you about this? Well, now it said something about wanting me to upload photos of myself. Is that okay? No, it is not.
Well, so you mentioned a few months ago, I believe you said regulation. I'm wondering if we can quickly touch on any of that realm and also policy implications for this. I mean, after all, we want to be compassionate and supportive of the teenagers in our lives and how, again, they're growing and having those conversations in appropriate ways. At the same time, these systems perhaps do require some regulation, and maybe there are also policy solutions here. How does your work inform those conversations, or what are your opinions of the kinds of regulations that would be helpful in this particular conversation?
Yeah, I think that there's multiple ways to think about this. Firstly, the current platforms need to be regulated. There needs to be policies. Adolescents need to be put first. Their developmental sensitivities in their brain. Platforms should be built to highlight and make platforms work for the benefits of adolescents rather than using their developmental sensitivities as a way to engage and monopolize and make money on our youth. There are, policies that we can do either at like a school level or a state level, but really regulating many of these platforms is key. I think in an ideal world, we would develop adolescent centered platforms that really optimize their social relationships and their need to belong and their need for social rewards in a way that really helps them to connect, and not in ways that are really exploiting those neural vulnerabilities that we might see in adolescents. Our adolescents' brains are not broken, and they are not necessarily a vulnerability, but when we create a context that takes those neural sensitivities and capitalizes on it for a profit or for engagement, or knowing that it is potentially going to hurt adolescents, then those designs are not going to be the best for our
I understand y'all have talked about Section 230 a little bit already, but certainly that's an area that's probably ripe for an update, given how much has changed since those laws were introduced. A lot of different countries are trying a lot of different things, and even within the states, there are many, many different things out there. So we're a little bit living through a natural experiment where we'll see what policies may or may not work, unfortunately, by testing them from region to region. It is the case that for most Western nations and for China, we have the least restrictive access to both AI and social media compared to all of our peers. China is outlining the anthropomorphized aspects of AI, so it doesn't develop a relationship, it's just providing facts. Age-informed design has been picked up by most of Western Europe for doing the exact things that Eva's talking about. Bans are in place, there's pros and cons, schools are taking things out of classrooms. There's so many pieces here, but it really just depends on where you happen to live at the moment and what that particular school or community might be doing, or what's happening in a family. Nothing has happened top-down from either the government or the platforms for the United States.
So we'll wait and see as we live through this national experiment. And we've got just a moment here. I'm wondering if you might both just leave us with a note of hope. Something from either your research, your work with youth, that's giving you hope at the moment. This is, again, a very complicated time that we're all navigating, but certainly for, again, the youth, the teenagers in our lives, this can be a very stressful and challenging time for them, but what's giving you hope at the moment?
Yeah, I love to think about the future of our adolescents. They are the opportunity, and they're our future. And many adolescents are trying to shape the future of social media and take a very active role in social movements around the world. So many social movements that we see right now are being led by adolescents, and they're mobilizing together and trying to use social media for good, to reach each other, to make statements that they stand behind and that they care very deeply about. And so I'm hopeful that our adolescents will help lead us into a great future.
And I agree, and would add that I am so excited to see the energy that's come from parents and from school administrators, especially within the last year or two. There is no power without the customers who use these products. And when parents band together and say, why don't we all wait? I don't want my kid to be the only one that's not on there, but if you wait a year, then I'll wait a year, and then we don't have to say that we're the only one, and it works. And parents who are going to the school district and going to the state legislature and saying, can we just look at this a little bit? Can we just think about possibilities? It's working. It's incredible. No one can get something done like an angry and concerned mom. And that's driving the entire world and the entire market in this space right now, as it should.
Well, I found this conversation very helpful and hopeful and really inspiring in leadership. So thank you both. Please join me in thanking
Everyone will take a very short break, and we'll recharge the microphone batteries, and we'll be back in 5 minutes.
Thank you.